our second episode of Unlocking the Secrets of Autism. I'm Amy Dressler, and this is co-host Michael Dressler and co-host Russ Raposa and Karen Raposa. And we're going to have our topic tonight be about the diagnosis and what to do when you first get the diagnosis of autism. So Karen has some slides, and she's going to start the conversation.
So welcome again, everyone. I'd like to start by talking about the CDC rates of diagnosis. And so what the CDC reported in April of 2018 is that 1 in 59 children are now being diagnosed under the age of 21. And you may think that this is an old number because it says 2018, but the numbers are reported only every 2 years. And it takes a couple of years once they gather that information for them to actually report. So these numbers were actually collected in 2016. So there's this delay in reporting when these numbers come out. But what we know that boys are 4 times more likely than girls to be diagnosed. So when we look at that number of 1 in 59, for boys, that actually means 1 in 37 boys are diagnosed annually in the U.S. And of course, we both have boys. And so that, when we think about that number, is pretty astounding. And just knowing that the number continues to rise, we've talked about this earlier, that the CDC looks at the numbers and they calculate these numbers the same every year. And even though some people might say, well, you know, we're better, we're more aware, you know, no matter how they dice or slice these numbers, it's going up, and there's no denying
a staggering rate.
Yeah, and it's interesting to me. I always wonder, how come it's not an epidemic? If kids were getting measles at this rate,
yeah, it'd be definitely an epidemic.
they would say,
or anything else at this rate.
They'd say it's an epidemic.
It is an epidemic,
and
it is.
Yet
but
the federal government will not claim that it's an epidemic. So that's always been interesting to me, because even when you compare that number, 1 in 59, to other conditions that people might be a little bit more familiar with. The only thing that comes close is cerebral palsy, and most people understand what cerebral palsy is, and that it's a, usually something has happened at birth, and so we know a lot about cerebral palsy, yet we don't know a lot about autism. And what causes it?
Probably because they don't notice it at birth. You know, it's not an easy thing to see.
Yeah, exactly. We also talked as families about the cost when your child has been diagnosed. Not just the cost of their education, but the therapies. And Russ and I always giggle because we hear about the rates of divorce in families. And the number one reason people get divorced is financial. They have regardless. And then you start thinking about all the costs associated with your kid's diagnosis, and you're not even told like exactly what to do, when you get that diagnosis.
We have no
kind
idea
of
what
guessing.
to do.
I don't know if you have had any experiences. I'm going to bring up a slide in a few minutes about some of the things that people have tried when their kids have the diagnosis, and some of that stuff can be extremely expensive. But we know that the costs on this slide are just related to kids who are in public schools. Both of our kids are not in public schools. And so you take the cost for a typical child at $10,000 a year, and a kid who's in a public school ranges about $40,000 to $60,000. So that's 4 times. And then you look at our kids, and it's over $200,000 a year when they have to be living somewhere and someone has to be with them all the time.
Especially if they got a one-on-one.
They need a one-on-one many times.
So you're paying a whole salary even in public school for a one-on-one. There's a whole salary for that person alone before you even start with educational or therapeutic materials. You're just the salary.
And the education, the IEPs are different for every child, and their needs are different. Each child's needs.
And it takes so many resources, so many people to, occupational therapists and physical therapists and speech therapists and the list of
tracking the statistics. What is the child doing certain things at certain times, and graphing it and charting it and
trying to find a
analyzing
reason,
it. And is the medication, if they're getting medication, what is it working?
And the behaviors, are
Right.
the behaviors getting better? Because for a lot of kids, if they can't speak, they have autism and they can't speak,
Right.
their only form of communication might be their
act out,
behaviors.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, those functional behavioral analyses where what's the function of that behavior? What's that person trying to tell us?
Right.
Right.
And why are they doing that behavior? Is that their form of
Right.
speaking in
Right.
some way? So, the challenge has always been that there really has never been a medical way of detecting autism. But I was sharing with all of you a few moments ago that there is some research that I've been watching over the last couple of years. And we all know with scientific research, a good research study, you should be able to replicate it. Well, one study came out. It was a blind study, and so people who were diagnosed with autism the traditional way, they actually did a blood test, not knowing which people had been diagnosed with autism or not. And then with the blood, they used some type of algorithm on a computer, and with 97% accuracy, they were able to identify the people who had autism.
That's amazing.
And they have just recently been able to replicate that study.
That's
Which
amazing.
means probably
Yeah.
in the next year or two, there may be a blood test to be able to diagnose
Even at
autism.
birth, right.
Maybe.
Earlier, right.
They're doing with blood tests with markers and, are you susceptible to certain diseases? Are you susceptible
Right.
to
And the
different
earlier the
things?
intervention that you get, probably the better
better,
results. While the
yeah.
brain's younger and malleable, and
Right.
Right, right.
That's great news.
We were talking about how everybody's experience could be, and usually is so completely different, even the age that your child was diagnosed. So our stories are kind of similar in that fashion because our
Right.
kids were younger than 3, but the average age of diagnosis today is still 5 or 6 because that's when kids are getting ready to go to school and they get screened for it. And
right.
Yeah, and Brent was about 22 months, and
I mean, that's
And I was
amazing
just-
that it's 5. I find that amazing because
Yeah.
you think you would notice something way before that, but if it's mild, you might not.
yeah, it's just
know?
another thing when you think that everybody's story is so different.
yeah.
There's not
It
just, oh, kids get tested at this age and we find out at this age.
Right.
And
Children are all different. Their
Yeah.
diagnosis can be different.
yeah,
And you wonder sometimes too if parents, no, he can't have that or she can't have
A
that.
little denial.
And maybe, that's
Yeah.
it's a very personal
so.
decision. Yeah,
It
I
is.
think
very personal.
for a lot of people, there's that worry, my child's going to be labeled.
Yeah.
But then the risk there is they don't get the help
Yeah.
that
Early
they
on.
might need.
Definitely.
If
is.
it's your first child, I think that it would be difficult to know what a normal
Right. You don't have anything to compare it to.
Right.
True.
Yeah.
normal stages are.
Right. Yeah, that I think probably is part of why age 5 might be the case in a lot of families if you don't know what your child
that's
should be
true.
doing by that
That
age.
time
Right,
they
right.
do,
Right.
right.
Yeah. And then of course we know there is no cure. If there was, we wouldn't all be sitting here
Right.
talking about
true.
this. We
Exactly.
would just be sharing what the cure is and we'd have no more episodes to talk
Yeah.
about. So
And I wish that was the case.
yeah,
Yes.
I think we all do. And a lot of people do ask how genetics fits into this, and if you have one child with autism, what's the chance that you'd have another? And so the data shows it's about 2 to 18% chance that if you have one child with autism, you may have another, which is kind of low,
Yeah.
but it does
Especially
exist.
since I know families that have sometimes 3.
Yes.
So I'm
Yeah,
thinking, is
I've
2 to
seen that,
18
Yes.
that accurate?
Right.
Yeah.
Maybe
Yeah,
the
it
blood
just
test
seems
will
like-
change that
Maybe.
percentage.
It seems like I hear a lot of times, they have a child that has autism, and then they may have had the second child too close in time to know that it could possibly be autistic.
Right.
So,
Right, if the person's
let's
not
say in a year
diagnosed
and
and
not
could be 2 years
diagnosed.
old, and then you get pregnant again, you don't know because the
Yeah.
person's
and then
not
you
even
have 2
diagnosed.
children with autism. I
Yeah.
mean, those things happen
I know
pretty
a few
regularly.
families like that too.
Yeah.
They have 2, 3 children with
Right,
autism.
right.
And you wonder, could it maybe the parents, like you're talking about the algorithms, could it be something too genetic where
Right, we don't know.
I
don't
think
know,
they're going to
it's-
find that there is some kind of genetic component. I just can't imagine there's
Yeah,
not.
I
I mean, I
think
don't
there-
know, but my
yeah.
guess
It
is.
would be
think-
wonderful that this test could
Right.
at least
Right. I think there's
identify it.
strong confidence that there's something genetic, but that there's also some environmental piece, and that's
Right.
the part
Right.
that is
It's gonna be
just
tricky.
yeah.
Yeah, right.
To try to
tease out
factor
what
that
is
in for
happening,
every
yeah.
different kid, because everybody's story is different. Some parents will swear that it was round the vaccination time and
Right.
something changed, and other parents, and we're an example of, there's no coordination. We can't with any
Right.
confidence say,
Or
oh,
all
we
their
had a
kids got the
vaccination
same
and then
vaccine,
something
so-
happened. Yeah, and our other children got their
Right.
vaccines at the same time, and
The problem is that since we don't know, some of the theories are so preposterous
yes,
Right.
yes.
that it's not fair to the parents.
Exactly.
know.
And I've got a slide coming up about all the theories and speculations. But if we think about the signs and symptoms, even the signs and symptoms are so dramatically different. So I'll put all of them up on this slide. But Mike and Amy, why don't you talk about the signs and symptoms that you saw in Brent, and then we'll share kind of how
Sure.
completely different it was for Tomo.
So when
I mean, Brent was developing normally, so
Yeah,
our
till
story
about
was
20
kind of
months.
different. I mean, he was walking, talking, interacting, eye contact, everything was
about
right
22 months.
on par. And then he got a fever. He wasn't feeling well. Around 22 months. It was around October, November.
He had a high fever, and Amy brought it down very quickly. And I just noticed, like, in about a week, I didn't hear a sound from him. I didn't hear anything. I said, Amy, have you heard Brent talk, say anything? She said, I don't know. I've been so busy with the other kids. I don't know whether, what the story is.
right.
I've tried to have him talk, and he wouldn't talk. And
Yeah, I mean, he's a little under the weather, so
he was still under the weather, but it was
you have
like...
3 under 6. You're not really, you know he's not feeling well, but you're not really keyed in or tuned into, is he talking? Because, I mean, when has that really ever been an issue for any other kid? If they're not feeling that well, they don't talk that much, you know?
Right.
So,
It was almost like a switch.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just like a switch. And I said,
Right.
did the temperature do it to him? What, what
it's
did it?
Right.
So
and you call the doctor and they said, well, if how are they acting? Are they acting okay? A lot of people will say fever's the body's way of fighting something.
Yeah.
It's not an emergency, don't need to bring him in. That's
Yeah.
probably changed because he did have a very high fever for a 2-year-old, which we
Yeah.
know now is very dangerous.
Yeah.
But I mean, you rely on your pediatrician to be
Yeah,
the
right.
source of the correct information, and in hindsight, that probably wasn't the best guidance to say, well, just keep giving him Tylenol, it's not the big deal. I don't know at that point if it's been triggered. I'm not saying you can reverse it because it is what it is, and we don't know what
Right.
causes it.
Yeah, right.
And it
That's
could be when
true.
they find out that it had nothing to do with that fever. You don't know.
Yeah.
yeah.
And so then what happened?
So then we took him to the pediatrician, and she said, well, after she looked at everything, she said, I mean, I guess you could go to a neurologist. I don't really know what else could be wrong. Because I think he had a cough or something
when we
too.
brought him to the doctor, he didn't even want to stand. He was like lying down on the floor. And what I recollect is that she looked at him and, she couldn't really get any action out of him. And she said, I think you should take him to a neurologist, which, I didn't think too much of because I thought he just was still part of this under the weather.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that day changed our lives.
And even the neurologist that we took him to at the time was somebody out in Warwick, and I remember we did the Fragile X blood work because we thought that could be a thing. All these things that are thrown at you as possibilities. We did 2 overnight tests where they were checking to see if he was having seizures, and he finally said, it's probably autism, but it was very negative. Now, granted, that was 15, 16 years ago, but he said, he's probably not going to change, probably not ever going to get any better. It's probably just going to be like this for the rest of his life, which, was a terrible bedside manner and a terrible thing to say. And when he went to early intervention and had a great teacher, I told her what he said, and she said, oh, I hate that when people say that. That's so terrible. That is not true at all. Of course, when you put them in early intervention, you have therapies and things change. Of course, they improve somewhat. Nobody's
Absolutely.
going to stay like they were at
Exactly.
2 when they're 18, and that's true. I mean, I guess it's possible some terrible scenario could be that way, but even the neurologist wasn't trained enough to really be accurate
Yeah.
telling you
And
about
that's
the
what we find.
diagnosis. So but that was a long time ago. I'm not,
Yeah.
you know, and then we got a great neurologist at children at Hasbro, and he was wonderful and a whole, you know, 180 as far as his attitude, but you never know who you're going to get. And so it's very depressing. Somebody says, oh, that's just the way it's going to be forever. And you just kind of walk out of there like, oh, all right.
So what did they tell you? Did they recommend any types of therapies or anything?
No, I went, no, not the
No.
neurologist. We went back to the doctor and said, what do you think? And then
it was
I'm trying to think how we did
we
get
had
into
no
early
plan,
intervention.
no guide.
That's
I think that maybe the pediatrician might have said, I had my older son in early intervention, so I think I called them.
Yeah.
And he was just delayed speaking, so I kind of had a little bit of an entree into what early intervention was. And I went and had them kind of assess him, and they said, yeah. So then we started at-home ABA, and when he turned 3, he went into the preschool system.
So it sounds like early intervention kind of guided you towards the ABA and not a doctor,
Right.
which
I
is
mean-
completely different in our story.
Yeah, early intervention was very important.
I mean, we took
for
him to
us.
early intervention, and then, yes, one of the therapists there suggested ABA and gave us the name of an agency, but we're really piecemealing it together on the fly. Really didn't
Can
know.
you tell them what? Can you tell the public what ABA is?
Applied behavioral analysis, is that correct? I know sometimes people say
Yes.
it's not behavior, it's behavioral. So it's a one-on-one therapy. I think that, I don't know if I give the best definition, so help me out, but it tracks the improvements that are made by each thing they're doing, so
like
that
trial
you,
sessions.
yeah,
They just
trial, a
keep
discrete
going over and
trial, I
over.
guess they call it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so interesting how different our stories are, yet these kids have the same diagnosis. So for us, you know, two of the key things that I kept telling the doctor, because he wasn't really speaking at all, ever.
Ever.
But that wasn't my biggest worry. My biggest worry was he would not respond to his name.
Yeah.
I would say
big.
Cookie, and he'd look right at me. But if I said Tommy, Tomo, Tom, he would never turn. Now, for the pediatrician, he should have known immediately
Absolutely.
that that's a social response. When you
Right.
say someone's name and you look, you want to socialize. And there was but food is a basic need. So
Right.
he was looking because he needed food to survive, but he didn't
Right.
want to be
He
social.
didn't need to look
Yeah.
at you to survive.
So the pediatrician kept saying, oh, he's got an older brother and sister, that's
Exactly.
why he
That would
doesn't.
talk for him.
Yeah. So then I said, but he doesn't point. You know, babies point, and
Yeah,
I
what's
always
this?
say,
What's
you
that?
know, are you ever in a room by yourself pointing? Because if you are, you should probably see somebody about that, because we do that because we want someone else to look at what we're pointing at,
Right.
right?
Right.
And he
Right.
never did that, and I told my pediatrician that. So my gut just, as he kept
And
saying,
even when you told your pediatrician, there was no response like, oh, well,
he's
wow,
got
that's a
an
different
older
thing.
brother
Yeah,
and
the first thing he
sister.
said to us, he's got an older brother and sister, don't worry about it.
Yeah.
So we insisted on a speech evaluation, and he fought me on it, and finally agreed. And sure enough, I knew the speech evaluation was going to come back delayed. It was no question.
Right.
And that's when, so then our stories get a little similar because early intervention got involved. But this was before he was diagnosed. Just he was diagnosed with a speech delay.
Right, right.
Yet, while they were working with him, we just kept looking at what was going on and saying, we just, you know, something's not right, something's not right. And I remember them, like you had said something about, have you had him tested? And I remember asking if they thought he had autism. And even still today, when I think about that moment, I knew nothing about autism. I don't even know why I said it. And the only
Interesting.
thing I knew was the movie Rain Man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is.
But he talked.
And he,
Yeah,
right.
But he was
Yeah.
he was
Right,
like Asperger's, I
but
think.
for
Asperger's,
the
very
social
smart.
stuff, you know, so we, based on their reaction, because they couldn't diagnose.
We sort of knew
Right,
there
they're
was
very
something
careful about
by-
that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
we knew.
Yeah, so
We knew there was something.
and there was a waiting list at that time. We wanted to take him to Children's in Boston. There was like a
It's like a
2
year.
Yeah,
Wasn't it a year
it
or
was,
more?
It was
To
at
do
least
what?
8 months to
do
get
what?
into their developmental pediatrician.
Just to get
Okay.
a diagnosis,
Just
there
to get
was a wait?
8 months.
Oh my gosh, that's terrible.
We
So
knew
you
a few
needed a
people.
developmental pediatrician. A regular pediatrician at the time would not be able
Yeah.
to.
So I
help
think
you.
we waited 4 months instead of 8 because we had a few connections that were helpful, but and that's when he was officially
terrible.
That's
diagnosed.
frustrating.
Very
Now,
frustrating.
we were told the day he was diagnosed that he should get was 30 hours of ABA.
Right.
So
Yeah.
at least
Like
we had
intensive,
Some guy.
at least
ABA.
we had, that document to
Say,
say
this is
the
what he
doctor
needs.
says he needs this, right? But I've heard families where they don't have that, and we were talking about how payment. We're talking finances. Years ago, ABA wasn't covered, and still today in the state of Massachusetts, it is under insurance. Yet there are still people like myself who have insurance coverage, and their companies are based outside of Massachusetts. And even though my kid lives in Massachusetts, if your insurance coverage doesn't come from the state of Massachusetts or through the state of Massachusetts, your kid doesn't get coverage for.
That's terrible.
Even if you have
Right.
Mass
Yeah.
Health, or is that a whole other thing about getting Mass Health in order to cover it?
So Mass Health is his secondary insurance.
Oh.
So that's probably good for our audience to know.
Yes,
Why don't you
absolutely.
talk a little bit, Amy,
Yeah.
about how you go about getting Mass Health once you have a diagnosis and how important that is?
Well, it's a lot easier now than it used to be. Honestly, they used to make it so difficult that when you'd fill out the application, if one I wasn't dotted or T wasn't crossed, they'd send it back. The sit and write, you'd have to send it back again. They'd send it back again. And basically, you felt it was a game to see if they could wear you down enough to give up on it. Now there are places that you can go. I don't know off the top of my head, but there's centers that you can go and you can get the resource online, and they'll actually, you can bring your documentation or information, and they kind of walk you through it and do it so that you don't have to mail it back and forth the way it used to be, the old way. But I mean, I think it's so important for people, and I didn't do it right away, but if I could go back and tell myself something, I would say get that secondary insurance. You might not think you need it if you have Blue Cross or something, but the secondary insurance comes into play for so many things. I mean,
yeah.
not just therapy, but prescriptions or doctor's visits or whatever.
Hospitalizations, too.
Hospitalization is
Hospitalizations, I
a
mean,
huge,
Yes.
huge piece
I
of
mean,
it. So if you don't have two insurances, you're going to be stuck with a
Yes.
lot.
Oh.
And insurance has changed so much, you may still be stuck with something. But Mass Health has been a blessing. I mean, it's really been a blessing. You really need it if you don't have it and you have a child with a diagnosis and live in Mass. That would be a piece of advice I would give is figure out, go to somebody, call, whatever, and figure out how to get Mass Health and how to get the eligibility, have your paperwork that your child has autism, and then go through DES and make sure they're eligible with all the buzzwords, because you have to be eligible for some of the things to even access them under Mass Health, if that makes any sense. But
So tell the audience what DES is, because we use all these
I know,
abbreviations
and
that people
I'm
don't
like,
know.
oh, I hope I can remember the exact things. I think it's the Department of Eligibility Services. And I had somebody help me. Federation for Children with Special Needs is a great organization in Mass, and they have a phone number, and you can call them, and they will actually call you back either that day or they'll email you back. They're great at answering questions, and they have all the information. People I think that used to work for Mass Health now work for them, and they will actually say, write out your letter, use these phrases and these buzzwords, which I did, and your application will go to the top of the list. And I thought, is that how it works? So, I mean, it's terrible, but it's good. If you know the buzzwords and you can put it in, you'll get approved a lot faster if you can just make sure you have some of the 5 criteria that they look for. If you've mentioned that in your letter, it's like, that makes their job easier. Oh, yep, okay.
There it is.
And
I mean,
see,
it feels like a game, but
we never had that guidance early on, so I mean, he didn't have Mass Health for many years, but the guidance that we had was to go work with the Department of Developmental Services, make sure
Right.
they're aware.
That's
You
true.
would have thought that they would have, provided a little bit of guidance
Exactly.
there. So that's why what we're doing is so important, and I think, and so helpful to families who might be watching, because everything that we've learned, we can share, and hopefully other
Right.
families will have some
Hopefully.
access to things that they wouldn't have known about otherwise.
Right. I know we've kind of talked about this, saying if we could go back and just write a checklist, just write a list. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not one size fits all, but there sort of is a list of things you really could do that would fit everyone, like getting Mass Health, getting disability,
Absolutely.
eligibility approved. There are things that everyone really could do that's in common, and then have like just almost like a checklist of what you should do when you get diagnosed. Not that we have all the answers, but there's some things that you really have to do to get started.
Good starting point.
Right,
Absolutely.
and I think
Yeah.
that's
Definitely.
what we're planning on doing with the show, is
Yeah.
to do that.
I think
Maybe
every
we can
time
have
we
a
start this
checklist
show,
eventually.
Yeah,
we think we're not going to have enough to talk about.
yeah, but
And
yeah,
we're worried, what if there's nothing to say?
And we always, I think we always end at a point where we really want the audience to write in and share with us what
Yes,
do they want to know, because
we-
between the two of us, we have a lot of experience, the four of us,
Yes.
Right.
two
Yes.
couples, and
I hope people will write in, and I know Russ has a lot of connections in
Yeah.
the police department, being a sheriff, and I think that that's another whole topic of a level of awareness.
Yeah, definitely. We're going to get to that for sure.
Yeah.
and we have this email address, autismnewengland@gmail.com, and we're getting responses. Do you want to read some of the responses that we've gotten so far?
Actually, I do have my contacts in, so let's see.
If somebody did that to me, I'd be like, we're in the class.
Okay, this was from Chanel. Okay, for show topics, I think I would like to see discussed what caregivers, parents of those on the spectrum are doing to support themselves. There's a lot of one must to do support their own health in order to be a superhero for their children, loved ones with autism spectrum disorders. I have so many topics, but I think you probably already have enough to discuss. Smiley face. Hope all is well. Chanel.
Oh, that would be actually a really good topic,
It would
that
be.
we talk about
Yes.
what we do to keep ourselves healthy,
Healthy
and
and-
positive, because we
Yes.
know some days are not so positive.
Right,
True.
true.
All right, here's another one. Hello, everyone. Russ and I wanted to share some exciting news with all of you. Okay, that's wrong. It's the top, see?
Okay.
Karen and Russ, this is fantastic. You have so much to share. This will help so many families. You are admired so much. Congratulations. Lisa. Thank you, Lisa. And last one here is, this is amazing. The awareness you are bringing to the community and families going through a diagnosis is incredible. I'm so proud of you guys. Can't wait to see the rest of the episodes. Thank you, Liz.
Okay.
So,
That's great. I hope that we'll reach enough people to get more response. You never know when
I
you do this,
agree.
who's going to tune in, how fast will word spread, how many people will you reach, but there's a lot of people out there interested, and hopefully the word will
Absolutely.
spread and we'll get feedback and be able to do more.
yeah, that'd be great.
It's an endless amount of topics.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So,
So that ends our second episode.
That ends it, and we hope that you'll go to our email and send us your feedback. Hopefully we'll be back again next month and have another episode with whatever everyone else would like us to talk about.
Great.
So thanks for joining us.